Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Smart Ways to Manage Remote Teams. I am Emmanuel Clement, Partnership Manager for the SEMLEP Growth Hub. For those who don't know, SEMLEP is a public-private body whose role is to help economic growth thrive across the South East Midlands. But in this difficult time, we are focusing on supporting businesses through our business support team and webinars. During this webinar, we welcome your questions. So if you could please type them in the chat section, that would be great. And we will go through a session after Neil's presentation. Many organizations have recently been forced to introduce working from home. But how do you effectively manage or lead people remotely? To tell us what it means to managers is our guest speaker, Neil Massa, who is Director of S&T training, Smarter Not Harder, helping large and small organizations to be more productive. Over to you, Neil.
Thank you very much. Let me All right, just checking that my screen is working. Sorry, but okay. Apologies there, folks. I think it's the first time I've done one of these things. I've done about 30 in the last 2 weeks. So my apologies there. So welcome to this webinar on smart ways to manage remote teams. I'm Neil Massa. As Emmanuel said, a director. I'll give you a little bit more background in a moment. I'll talk to you about what doesn't change when you manage people remotely, and I'll talk to you about what does, particularly around the importance of putting in place a structure and a routine for you to manage people with, and the importance of getting the balance right within that structure and routine that you set up. I'll sprinkle my presentation with a whole range of useful tips, techniques and tools that you can take away and use. I'll conclude with a summary. I've actually built into the 45 minutes 2 Q&A sessions where we'll take the questions that you're typing into chat and break up my presentation with some of those. And then at the end, there's an optional 10 minutes of Q&A over and above those 2 sessions. I'm going to use the terms leader and manager interchangeably. I know they're different and there's a whole debate about the difference, but just kind of go with me on that one. So in terms of background, as Emmanuel said, I'm a director at Smarter Not Harder. Our core business is about improving employee productivity. On a normal week, I'd be working with leaders and managers like yourselves to find smart ways to work within an organisation. You know, our job is to help people save time, but actually to also live more balanced lives. Over the last couple of years, I've noticed a trend towards remote and agile working. Not lots of organisations doing it, but more in the last few years. But of course, at the moment, everyone's doing it, and it's kind of forced us into this place to experience it. I've worked remotely for 17 years. All 3 businesses that I've run have been run on a remote basis. I've managed for 15 of those years people at a distance. And so I've got a wealth of experience sort of firsthand, but also helping others to introduce remote working. So I don't know how you responded when you got the news that you and your team were going to have to work from home. What I observed was that some people immediately thought of the positives and then they discovered the negatives, and then other people instantly thought of the negatives and then discovered some positives. I think the truth of it is that there are positives and negatives. My aim with you today is to help you to maximise those positives and, where possible, remove or minimise the negatives, because I think done correctly, working from home can be incredibly productive and incredibly enjoyable for everyone concerned. The second purpose is to introduce you to something called virtual presence. You know, as a leader and as a manager in your business, that when you walk into the office, people know that you've arrived. And so you have a physical presence that has an impact on your team. We clearly don't have that in a remote environment. So what we've got to do is we've got to create that in a virtual sense. And so what I want to do is give you some ideas about how you might create more of a virtual presence for your people over the next 8 to 12 weeks, however long it is we've got left in the lockdown. Now, some things don't change. You know, our aims as leaders and managers, I think, broadly remain the same. We need to keep our people focused. We need to keep them motivated. We need to make sure that they do their jobs well, that they're doing their work competently, that they're doing it confidently. We need to make sure that they're getting the same level of satisfaction from their work. And also all that time that we've put into building a team, we need to keep that teamwork going. So I don't think our aims are any different. You know, listening to this, we'll all have your own unique ways of doing the things that I've just mentioned. I don't think what you do changes very much. It's more to do with, you know, how you do it. But of course, some things do change. And because our location and routine have changed, that has a profound effect on the way people behave and a profound effect on their habits. So our challenge as leaders and managers is to transfer that good practice and those good habits across into our new environment. And those that won't transfer, we've got to make sure that we adapt or adjust them, because it's not the what's of leadership that change when we work and lead remotely, it's more the hows. So the number one piece of advice, which is given to anybody who starts managing remotely or indeed working remotely, is that you absolutely need some structure. And I guess 4 or 5 weeks in, you're kind of learning this. And I think the place that we need to look to begin with is, you know, the structure that you put in place for yourself personally. Something like, for example, your daily routine. Now, we're all settling into those daily routines. You've probably got a way that you start your day. When it comes to working and managing remotely, our advice is that you stick as much as you possibly can to the old routine. So if you're a gym junkie and you're always getting in the gym at 7 o'clock, then our advice is go to the gym in your lounge, do it with Joe Wicks, but try and keep things the same. You know, if you used to start at 8, then, you know, carrying on at that time is, you know, good practice, because that's actually beneficial for us, but also the knock-on effect is it's beneficial for our people to not see too much of a change there. But there's a couple of danger zones that I want to point out to you. I think a lot of people believe that you take far more breaks when you work from home. You can probably relate to me on this, but actually you might have found that you don't. And the danger is that you work all morning without a break, or you work through your lunchtime and you actually take fewer breaks. Now, you might be able to do that for a few weeks, but then after that, that really will impact your productivity. So we've got to make the effort to make sure that we do book them in and stick to them. I do that religiously. Otherwise, for some reason, I can get absorbed in what I'm doing, because I don't think you get the cues that you will get from the office. At the office at 11 o'clock, there's a whole bunch of people shouting about going to get a coffee, or you can smell the croissants. You get those cues to alert you to the fact that it's already mid-morning. And likewise, at the end of the day, you don't get the cues. You don't see people leaving. You don't see people waving. You don't hear the change in volumes. And so we've got to make sure that we put those hard stops in place. I think the most important thing as a leader from this point of view, though, is that you set a really good example, that you set a good example at the start of the day, that you stick to your breaks, you take them virtually if you want, you stick to hard stops, and you actually set a good example for other people. And if there's one action that I would recommend people take away from this webinar, it would be just to check in again with your team to find out how they're transitioning to and from work, and just talking to them about their daily routines and how they're developing. So I wanted to just pause just for a few minutes now, and if there are any questions in the chat, just kind of pick those up and give you a bit of a break from my beautiful Bucks accent. So I wanted to know, you know, what are the questions? What are the greatest challenges you think your team are facing right now when working from home? What do you think their greatest concerns are? So, Emmanuel, if you're going to facilitate the questions for me, that would be great.
Yes. At the moment, we don't have too many, but somebody's asking, will we get access to these slides?
Right. Okay. Yeah. So a few housekeeping things. Thank you very much, whoever it was. So there is a deck for you that you will receive at the end of the session. In fact, the intense writing part is about to come up, so you can just relax knowing that all the key slides that you need will be on the in an email to you and be sent to you. That will all be taken care of. If there are no other questions, Emmanuel, then I'll move into the next bit, because I think the next bit of the presentation, thinking about where we are now in the crisis, I think it's this next bit, which is the bit that's going to really stimulate the conversation.
There were a few things actually, Neil's coming up.
Okay.
Yeah. So somebody mentioned it's actually not being alone, and also thinking that it is a holiday time rather than working. So I think it's you know,
okay, so let me take the
really.
second question first. So what I'm picking up, so I speak to lots of people now about where they are in the journey from lockdown starting and sort of like the fog descending, people going into a panic, to the fog starting to lift now, people being a little bit more settled. And the debate that I'm having and the discussion I'm having with a lot of people is, when is it okay to start talking about productivity and performance with my team? Because in the first few weeks, it was all about settling in and sorting people out and kind of getting comfortable with our new environment. Well, we've had 4 or 5 weeks of that. There's more than enough time to get settled. The last thing that we want is people being complacent. And hopefully you won't hate me for saying this, but the second webinar that I've created is all about how to have that specific conversation and some tools so that you can have that conversation, which is quite delicate, okay, in a very constructive and positive way. So if you look on our website, there's a webinar called how to manage productivity and performance at a distance. And it talks about that question. So I can answer that one, but not straight away. The things about isolation and people being alone, I'm going to pick that up in the next part of the presentation. So if it's okay with you, Emmanuel, what I'll do, unless there's any other questions, is I'll get into part 2, and then I think there'll be more questions thereafter.
Okay, so shall I leave the question for later? There are a few more.
Oh, is there? Okay, go on.
Yeah,
I've got a couple more minutes. Yeah.
I think the greatest challenge also is communication being mentioned.
Oh, without a shadow of a doubt. And again, there are some things which I will cover in the next part of the presentation, which I think really make a massive difference to the quality of communication. Communication is absolutely the death of productivity at this time. I think the tendency for people is to over communicate. And what I'll do in the next part is I'll talk about the different things that we can do to make sure that there's enough communication and not too much. Because I think the initial tendency is to overdo it and want to talk too much. And actually, for most people, that's not what they want. Okay. I think the thing is there's no golden rule. And certainly somebody who's on their own and isolated will probably need more contact. But I know some people at the moment that they are loving this right now. The fact that they can be alone and not be bothered is just heaven for them. So I think it's about being flexible in the way that we lead and manage our teams, and not having this kind of one size fits all regime for absolutely everybody that's in our team. So Emmanuel, I'm going to press on with the next part. And
okay, we keep the question for later.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I'm going to be able to answer some of the ones that are going to be coming up. So
thank you.
The thing that I think is really important, and you've been thinking about this, and leaders and managers probably over the last 4 or 5 weeks, is how do I structure the management and the leadership of my team? So when you're putting in place a structure for managing remotely, there are 3 really important areas that you need to give some consideration to begin with. And they are the task, the individual, and the team. Anyone here who's familiar with the work of John Adair will recognise those labels. We need to make sure that we dedicate time and attention to getting the job done. We need to make sure that we give time and attention to people as unique human beings, but also we need to give time and attention to maintaining teamwork and team spirit. Then what we need to do as we build our structure is we need to think about those 3 things in 3 time frames: daily, weekly, and monthly. So I'm going to build up the picture here and populate those 9 boxes for you so that you've got some idea of the sorts of things that you might do to create a management structure that you can use to remotely manage your team. So I'm going to start with the weekly time frame. And if you were to go to a really good hotel, not that you're likely to do that at the moment, but if you were, what would happen is that the staff, if they were well trained, would check you in. And what they would do is they would find out how your journey had been, to gauge how you were feeling when you arrived, because they know that the way you arrive and your first impressions counts for a huge amount in terms of your stay there. So they check you in, and then what they do when you leave, as you're passing over your credit card, they'll check you out and they'll ask you things like, how would you rate your stay out of 10? Was there anything that we could have done to improve it? Because they know that not just first impressions, but final impressions really count for a lot. So that's what a good quality hotel will do. I check in and check out each member of my team every week. It's one of the most important things that I do. I can't see them, or at least I can through Zoom, but I can't see them physically. And I imagine my job is a little bit like a sports coach. You know, if you're a sports coach, you've got to get your team raring to go, focused, motivated before they step onto the pitch so that they give their best performance. As a leader and as a manager, I need to make sure that on Monday, you know, my team have turned up and they're in a good place, because I don't know what's happened over the weekend. So I like to check people in as early as I possibly can on a Monday. Now, I have some senior leadership meetings that take place between 8 and 10 on a Monday. So my check-ins occur starting at 10 o'clock. They're only short, 10 to 15 minutes. I do it via Zoom because I think it's nice to see people and you get more information that way. And I always talk about the same 3 things. I ask them about the weekend. They ask me about mine. And then I talk about the priorities for the week and is there anything they need from me? And I do that very deliberately, because what I'm training everybody to do that joins our organisation is to think beyond themselves and to think beyond today. I know it's important to live in the moment, but I like people to say to me, yes, Neil, this week I've got some really important stuff going on Wednesday and I'm going to need your help with that. So that they're forewarning me that actually I need to set aside some time so that there are not so many surprises to me from my team. I always ask them, is there anything you need from me? Because I think it's important that they know that I'm interested and I'm there to support them. But also, if they don't flag something to me, it's something that I can raise with them and say, look, I asked you on Monday, is there anything you need from me? And it's Thursday and you want 2 hours of my time. Can you just explain what's happened? So that we get into the process of being a little bit more proactive in our relationship. When I check people out, it's usually on a Friday. It's not always, because some people only work Monday to Thursday, but I do it through a different medium. I do it through email. And the reason I do it that way is because I want people to stop and I want them to reflect on how the week's been. And the email gives them the chance to do that. Now, in the early days, I didn't give them any kind of guidance on how to do this. And so some people said one word, fine. And other people pretty much wrote down what they did for every hour of the week. So what I do is I ask people just to share with me, you know, a couple of things that have gone well that they are pleased about during the week. And then something that didn't go well is perhaps a bit frustrating or disappointing. So I get sort of a balance. And then I get them to send that to me sort of midday or early afternoon on the day that they check out. I don't leave it to the end of the day. And the reason for that is because if I detect something in somebody's email that makes me think that they're not in a good place, I can get on Zoom or I can get on the phone and I can talk to them about it, because I don't want anyone leaving my team or anyone leaving the business in a bad place. I much prefer to get on the phone and say, look, I know what's happened. I understand. Forget about it, park it, enjoy the weekend. Let's pick it up in our Monday check-in. So I think that's a really important role for us to play. I also have a rule, which is, you know what, if you're going to do something as a manager and leader, do it consistently. It's the consistency that creates the virtual presence, that creates the impact of these things. So I also have a midweek catch up with people. I don't mean a sort of project related catch up. I mean just an individual one-on-one, 10 to 15 minutes, middle of the week, usually Wednesday, no agenda. Okay. It's for me to take the temperature, because a lot can happen in a few days, particularly in an environment like this. And I just want to make sure that they're okay. And I think that's my responsibility to do that. But there's another reason I do it as well. And that is because what happens when you work remotely is quite often people fire off emails and make telephone calls, and there can be a lot of noise and a lot of traffic, which is unnecessary. And what I mean by unnecessary is that somebody picks up the phone to me on Tuesday at 11 o'clock and asks me a question which actually could have waited till a Wednesday. And so what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to educate people to think about, can it wait till Wednesday? Think a little bit more purposefully about when they ask certain things. Now, when it's an emergency, of course, different rules apply, but not everything's an emergency and some things can wait. And so this is just my way of helping people to become a little bit more mindful of our relationship, but also a bit more mindful of their relationship with others. Again, you know, be consistent. I think once in the middle of the week is enough, but if you've got a new starter, you're probably going to need to do that a little bit more frequently. I've got some COVID specific check-in and catch-up questions. These will be in the deck. But I think at the moment, checking people's energy levels, checking their anxieties, any rumours that they've heard, if they've, you know, still got all the equipment they need, I think those things are important. So I think you can see those and use those when you get the deck. Before I open up the questions again, I just want to talk about the basic rations that we need to give people when they're working remotely, and the basic rations they need from you as a leader. And the basic rations are the 4 A's. So this 4 A's comes from some ancient leadership wisdom. And this wisdom suggests that if you want people to follow you, if you want to be a great leader, you have to, as a minimum, give people 4 things. You need to give them attention, appreciation, affection, and acceptance. Now, let me clarify a couple of things here, because this is the literal translation from way back when. I think attention and appreciation are self-explanatory, but affection, what they meant is that you show as a leader that you care about somebody, not just as an employee, but as a human being, and you care about them and their family, which is slightly different. Acceptance, what they meant by that was that you recognize that people are different, and you accept that there is a big benefit to that, but also there's a downside, and that sometimes we just have to respect and accept that people are different. They have different views and share, you know, different values on things. So if you've got simple structure like check-ins and catch-ups, that makes sure that people get the attention they need. You can then just feed in the other things. One thing I would put here as a bit of a warning around attention, and it's commonplace right now. When people start working remotely, quite often they're too hands-on. Now, there's nothing wrong with being hands-on. There's a time and a place for that. But you know what it's like if somebody's too hands-on with you. You know what? There's downsides to it. What some people do is they start off using the hands-on style, and then they go to the hands-off style when everything calms down. Then they leave people alone. But you know as well as I do that being too hands-off has a downside. So what people do is they leave their team alone for 3 or 4 days, something goes wrong, and then they lurch back to being really hands-on. And then when things settle down, they go to hands-off. Now, that lurching is even worse than one or the other. When people don't know what's going on, they find that highly disruptive. So we've got to be really careful, really mindful of that. So to lead effectively, we need structure, we need some consistency, and we need that presence. But be realistic. Don't do something that you can't stick to. So I've got to question and answer session number 2. Hopefully there's some questions coming through. Emmanuel, if you can assist and tell me whether or not we've got any questions.
Yes, we have, Neil, yes. We've got someone who's saying that they've had some staff working from home always, but now they're all working from home. How do you ensure people take those breaks you talked about?
Okay, it seems to be that my audience is kind of aware of what I'm going to be talking about in the next part of the presentation, but I think I'm going to just address it now anyway. But what I think is really important as a leader is that we encourage people to take breaks through what we demonstrate through our behaviour. So what I will do is I will send a note to Charles this morning saying, do you fancy a virtual cappuccino this morning? And Charles will go, yeah, that's fine. I might ping a note to Josh saying, Josh, do you fancy a virtual panini at lunchtime? And he'll go, yes. But I think that's the sort of thing that we need to take some responsibility for to begin with. I don't think you can force people to do it, but I think leading by example is important. And of course, you don't just have to have lunch with one person. You could have coffee or lunch with a couple of people. So I think my advice initially is just to lead by example and do it yourself first and show people. And then I think when they enjoy it with you, that will overcome, any concerns they might have doing it with other people. But to my point earlier, some people just want to be left alone, and we just need to know who they are. If they'd rather live the life of a monk for the next 8 to 12 weeks, let them live the life of a monk if that's what they would like. So thanks for that question. Emmanuel, what's next?
Yeah, thank you, Neil. How do you best handle SP persona issues?
How do you
handle SP persona issues? I'm not sure what SP means in that context. So Ashley, would you mind specifying, please? Maybe we leave that one for a minute. Somebody's worried about the balance between checking in with their team but looking like they're micromanaging.
Yeah, and I think the risk at the moment is people overdo it. So I think less is more, but it's the consistency that makes the difference. So if we do things consistently, people know when you're going to speak to them, they know what it's going to be about. And as long as you stick to that, that creates, I think, the right sort of message, rhythm and routine. It's that random checking in, that's daily reporting that absolutely drives people mad. So when it comes to, the structure, checking people in, as I've suggested, a midweek catch up and checking them out. Those 3 pillars, that should be enough for most people that you've got a good, mature working relationship with. If they need anything else around that, you'll probably find out, and I'll give you a few other thoughts around that. But those 3 chunks, checking in, catch up in the middle of the week and checking out, that should be enough to begin with. And then, of course, in your ongoing dialogue with people, you can say, you're getting enough attention from me, too much, too little. But start somewhere, keep it consistent, and I would say flex it from there for people. If I've got a new starter, I know that I would need to speak to them much more regularly, particularly under circumstances like they are at the moment. But if anybody new was joining, I would speak to them every day. And that would be the case for the first couple of weeks. And then after the first couple of weeks, I'd say, how would you feel about making it every other day when we catch up? And gauge it from them. But I think it's about interacting with your team and finding out whether or not it's too much or too little, but putting those 3 pillars in place. We've got another minute left, Emmanuel.
Oh, thank you, Neil. The SP meant actually salesperson personal problems.
So if a salesperson has got personal problems, or I guess I guess it depends what that means. So what was the question then? So just read the full.
How do you best handle salesperson's persona issue or personal problems?
Okay, so how do you best handle a salesperson's personal issues? Well, I'm wondering whether or not the fact that it's a salesperson makes any different from any person. But I think the thing is that there are always sort of lines and boundaries that we have to draw when we employ people. And I don't think you do yourself any harm by just listening in a non-judgmental way. And for me, that's always the first step if I feel that I'm moving into territory which might not be territory that I should be involved with. And it's not for me to judge, but sometimes I think people who've got personal problems, whatever they might be, when they go to their friends don't often listen without judgment. Their friends are willing to come in and give advice and say what they should do, whereas actually you as a manager or leader is actually in a position just to listen and offer no judgment. I think then they're, depending upon how severe the problems are, you might then need to get in help, or you might feel that you can approach it, tackle it yourself. But I think it's about just listening, not judging. And then once they've told you, letting them sleep on it, giving it 24 hours and come back to it. I let it breathe. But, I think feel, kind of humbled that they should come to you with something like that, as long as they're not dumping on you. Right, I heard the buzzer. We've got to get back on and finish the final leg of the presentation. So thanks for your questions, folks. We've got 10 minutes at the end to do a few more questions. Emmanuel, I'm going to move on to my next slide. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
So the structure for managing remotely is coming together for us. When you look at the kind of weekly structure, we've got the start of the week, the end of the week, check-ins, catch-ups, check-outs. They're largely focused on getting the job done and checking that the person as an individual is okay. Of course, what we've got on an ad hoc basis every single day are conversations with our people. Now, they will largely be focused on the task and getting the job done. That's what we talk about a lot during the day. That's fine. It'll get plenty of attention. But of course, every time you speak to somebody every day is a chance to check in on how they're feeling every day. Okay. But you won't get the chance to speak to everybody every day. I don't. And I don't see it necessarily important to check in on everyone every day. However, what I do to maximize my time is when I'm speaking to Charles, I might ask him, have you had any contact with other members of the team? And use that individual just to sense check how other people are doing, so that during the course of a day, I've actually got a little bit of insight about the whole team, albeit that I haven't spoken about them. And that way, I think that helps to generate greater insight. So I'd like to talk a bit about the column on the right-hand side, the team column, and what we can do to ensure that the team spirit remains high and that the teamwork is in place. So I put in place every week some bulletproof time. Now, when you're in the office, it's easy to grab people into a huddle and say, I need 10 minutes of your time. There's something really important that I want to communicate to you. You get them in the huddle, you do a brilliant piece of communication. It's crystal clear exactly what needs to be done, and everyone goes away. You can't do that when you're working remotely. It's not that straightforward. And that's where bulletproof time comes in. So in your calendar, I would suggest Wednesday's as good as any other day, Wednesday afternoon. You put in half an hour, put it in particular color in the calendar, and that 30 minutes, I recommend 30 minutes, that 30 minutes of bulletproof time is time when everybody in your team has time to connect. So everybody ensures that nothing is in their calendar in that 30-minute slot. That means if you need to get everybody together quickly, bang, you've got a slot where you can do that, where you don't need to run around and find out who's available and who's not. Now, I'm suggesting one slot in the middle of the week. you could have a couple of slots. The choice is yours. It's the concept that's important. And the reason I say 30 minutes is so that you could actually break that down if you needed to into 2 15-minute chunks and deal with separate people or separate teams or separate issues within that 30 minutes. So get some bulletproof time in there. Team meetings, of course, are really valuable. The problem is that I think you've got to use them sparingly. I've heard over the last 4 weeks, 5 weeks, that people are a little bit tired of team meetings. And that's because I think team meetings live on a spectrum. They're either absolutely brilliant or they're really boring. And generally they live at one end of this spectrum or the other. So I think we've got to be really cautious in terms of using that as a tool to bring people together, because actually it can do the opposite. Now, I have some meetings that occur every week. I mentioned, you know, on a Monday that I have a leadership meeting. That's highly focused on task. However, what we do have is monthly we have team meetings. When there isn't a lockdown, we alternate those between face-to-face and virtual. When we have our virtual meetings, they're 50 minutes long. They're a third of the length of a face-to-face meeting, and they are all about the individual and the team. We don't share loads and loads of numbers, and we don't talk loads and loads about the work. It obviously comes in because it's part of the context, but it's there to actually engage people as individuals and get the team to sort of bond together. What's, I think, vital when you manage people remotely is that there is some consistency in the themes in the meeting. There are 3 things that we always talk about in our team meetings. I'm not talking about the numbers and the finances and the metrics. I'm talking about 3 things which actually underpin the success of our team and our organisation. If people know that every month those things are coming up, those become second nature. They become part of their DNA. I think the other thing is that I put a lot of time and effort into making my team meetings really valuable. I think if a team meeting has not got value for everybody in the meeting, you have to ask, why on earth are you doing it? So requires a lot of effort. That's why I'd say do them sparingly. My advice, though, is it's your decision. You're the best person to decide how many team meetings you should have. Should you have them weekly? I think yes, probably. You know, you need a short meeting, I think, at the moment each week, bringing people together. What about daily? I know some people who do, you know, 10-minute huddles every day with their team, and they work like a dream. But I think you've got to be the right sort of person, and you've got to have the right sort of culture to pull that off. My advice, you know, discuss with your team as a takeaway how they feel about the number of meetings that are being conducted. Are there too many, too few? Are they about the right stuff? What value? Because actually now's a great time to check in with them and ask them that question. And maybe at your team meeting, you can discuss team meetings. How's that for an opportunity to go into a trance? So less is more. That's my watchword on meetings. We touched on this earlier in the questions. Make sure that you're in the habit of getting some virtual team breaks and lunches in. I'm hearing about lots of organisations now that are doing virtual drinks nights, you know, so they all get together on Zoom and have a drink together at home, which, you know, may or may not work in your organisation, but in some it works brilliantly. As I said before, make it happen. Lead by example. You be the one that invites people for a virtual cuppa and cucumber sandwich in the afternoon, you know, for a virtual burger at lunchtime. Whatever it is, you make it happen, others will follow. So to communication, and the last few slides before we conclude, I think now is a great time to set some simple ground rules just so that everybody's crystal clear around communication whilst working remotely. You know, bad communication is the death of productivity right now. Maybe you've experienced it, maybe not. But what you need to do as a leader is you need to let your calendar do some of the talking. If you're not sharing calendars, you absolutely must. If you're concerned about that because of confidential or private entries, you know that you can put a padlock on the diary so that people don't see that stuff. But you need to let people know what you're doing and when. It's no good sharing a blank calendar. That would be a waste of time. Those of you that are familiar with our smart working program will be familiar with the me time concept. What I mean by that is that if you're a leader and a manager, you will need time for you to get your work done. And if you put a couple of purple patches in, one in the morning, one in the afternoon, that people can see which is time for you, if they're going to pick up the phone, they might think twice if they know that you're on your me time. So you need just to indicate to people, you know, when you're going to be available and when you're not. Clearly, if there is an emergency, we need a protocol for that, because this is where the communication starts to go wrong in most organisations. I was doing a bit of a favour for a friend who's a principal in a school in Northampton last year, and she said to me, could you come in and work with my team, which I did. One of the subjects that came up was communication, and somebody said to me that in the school, for emergencies, when teachers are on the playground, they have a walkie-talkie, and if a child goes down or a fight breaks out, they get on the walkie-talkie and the other teachers come, you know, to their help or rescue. And somebody chirped up in the conversation and said, the other day when I was on the playground, you called me on the walkie-talkie to ask me if I'd seen your favourite mug because it had gone missing from the staff room. And then a whole raft of things started to emerge that were being talked about on this emergency platform. You've got to have an agreed way of communicating emergencies. You know, it might be step 1, check my calendar. Step 2, send me a text. Step 3, call me. Don't use email for emergency. It's a nightmare, because the moment you do that, people will never get their head out of email for fear of missing something important. And that is the death of productivity. You know, set some expectation around email. If you send me an email, don't expect a response for 2 to 3 hours. You know what? Start to make sure that people get the ground rules of communication. Otherwise, you will be inundated with distractions and interruptions from people, many of which can wait. Set up a banter channel. So I think it's great to see videos of cats juggling spaghetti on a unicycle or whatever it might be, but it's quite nice to know where to go and get that, so that that doesn't interrupt with your flow and productivity, which means you might just want to create a simple charter, you know, a set of rules around what's okay and what's not. It's okay to have your husband in his dressing gown walk across a Zoom conference and not have to apologise for it. You know, it's okay to have a child scream out in the background, because we all know people are working under pressure. Stuff like that. So it's really important that we get that going. It's really important that we are clear. Final slide then, folks. I haven't spoken about the monthly time frame. I will do so now and then summarise. On a monthly basis, in our business, we run one-to-ones. They are sacred. They happen like clockwork, 12 times a year. We never miss them. We always have the same 7 agenda items, always the 7. It's always consistent. People know what to expect, no surprises, but of course then that gets into their DNA. And we separate one-to-ones from performance reviews. If you put yours together, I suggest you separate them if you do them remotely by 10 to 15 minutes. And what I mean here, just for clarity, is a performance review with someone is how well they're doing their job, how well they are performing. A one-to-one is about them as a person, how they're feeling, how motivated they are, how excited they are about the work that they're doing. Do they feel that they're getting the right level of support? It's about them. Two very different things, but also about the relationship with their team. So separate those two things would be my advice. So to summarize, what we need to do is we need to make sure that from a team perspective, we've got a weekly team meeting. You know, it's consistent, there's value there, that we've got bulletproof time in place. On a monthly basis, we need to have performance reviews in to check on the task and it being done well. We need to have one-to-ones to make sure that individuals are being treated like individuals. And we've got the regular team meeting, which helps to boost team spirit. So that's the 9 boxes populated. Now I have got a couple of requests. If you've enjoyed this, please tell other people. If you haven't enjoyed it, please don't. I've got an email address if you want to email something in confidence or something that you'd like to talk about a bit more specifically. We'll ask for your feedback. In return, you'll be sent a consolidated version of the slides. Webinar 2 is now live. That started yesterday, which is all about, is it too soon to talk about productivity and performance? And webinar number 3 is in the pipeline. So Emmanuel, if you would like to open us up again, I've got another 8 or so minutes for, or 10 minutes actually, I've got it on the nose. How about that? Yeah, another, yeah, it's amazing, isn't it, mate?
Yeah, we have questions. Thank you. Thank you very
good.
much for your tips.
Yeah, thanks for listening, folks. I mean, it's me talking at you. I don't know you're putting up with it, but you are. So thanks for that. Thanks for that. Right, yes, Emmanuel, do you want to kick me off?
Yes, okay. This is the first time our entire team is working from home. They have not been forthcoming with their concerns or issues during their daily calls. Are there any tips you can recommend so they can open up?
Right, so this is the first time that they've worked remotely as a team, and they've not been particularly forthcoming about the issues. Now, I don't know whether or not that's because the issues have been discussed in a public forum, in which case it might be worth doing that individually. If they're not forthcoming individually and you've not done it as a team, then you might want to switch it and do it as a team, because I think that might stimulate a different discussion. But I think it's about the way we frame the questions. And maybe, you know, what we want to do is we want to, you know, put a question out there along the lines of, as a team, you know, what do you think's stopping us from, you know, being more productive or getting more out of this experience? And just, I think, offer quite a non-threatening question and maybe open that up to the team and just kind of get some view. I think if you get a group of people together, it can spark, you know, a good conversation. I don't know what you've tried so far, but maybe those things could work. If they don't, you've got my email address, and just email me how you get on, and then I will come up with some other ideas for you. But, you know, it's about, you know, if one thing doesn't work, it's about trying something different. And don't give up. You know, just because you've asked once, don't give up. I think sometimes it's about, with my team, and I think this is probably a little bit more difficult when you're not used to working remotely, is I listen for kind of what they're not saying. I'm trying to pick up on the tone of what they're saying. You know, I'll say to people, I can't help picking up that you sound a little bit down, or I can't help noticing that you seem a little bit frustrated right now. So I have to, if I want to get something out of them, which is a bit more emotional, I have to play back what I'm hearing in their words. Anyway, hopefully there's a few ideas there. Great question, really challenging. I'm going to have a lie down after this. Emmanuel,
thank you,
another
Neil.
question, please.
All this is also about managing people with childcare responsibilities too.
I think so is the question, how do you do it if you've also got childcare responsibilities?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the issues to consider, you know.
Yeah, man, yeah. And so prior to COVID, I homeschooled my son for a year when he was younger, and I was running a business from home at the time. So that's the closest thing that I've got, because he's 19 now, and he's basically on the internet all the time or asleep. So he doesn't require too much management right now. But when he was much younger and we homeschooled him, he did. Okay. And also when he was doing his exams and he had quite a lot of free time to revise, you know, he was at home quite a lot. And I think that kind of mirrors a little bit of the situation that people are encountering right now. I've got children, and the advice is similar, which is it's as important for them to have a structure as it is for you to have a structure. And what I think is really valuable is making sure that there's a very clear routine for everyone in the family. So with my son, you know, we'd have 9 o'clock, you know, whatever it might be, maths revision, never more than 45 minutes on something tough. That is absolutely a hard and fast rule. 15 minutes, take a break, you know, have a drink, and then another 45 minutes of chemistry revision, 15-minute break, and then an hour of football, then lunch together as a family. The important thing is that it's about the variety and the size of the chunks, and every day having some variety in it. You know, you can't have a day which is full of revision. Nobody likes a day like that. You can't have a day that's full of study. Nobody really likes that. What we've got to do is have that blend and then work out how that blend best comes together for you and their schedules. I was talking to a woman on one of these webinars last week, and she was talking to her line manager about this problem because she had 2 young children. And in the end, her and her manager agreed that from, up until 11:30, she just focused on the children and getting them kind of through some schooling. And then from 11:30 onwards, she was focused on her work. And so she reorganized the way that she scheduled her time around what was working for her and her family. Now, if you can do that, fine. But I think it's all about the dialogue with your team and making sure that they've thought about the structure and the structure that works best. Recognizing that this won't last forever, we hope.
Thank you, Neil. Are you able to share your 7 questions on one-to-one, please?
Oh, I tell you what, that is going to be the subject of one of the other webinars, because there's a little bit more to it than just, if I shared the questions, it wouldn't really explain to people why they've been selected, because there's some sort of research and background around it. But if people want to stay connected to us, then as the webinars roll out, what's starting to happen is I put things into the webinar that provoke questions like the 7 questions, and that in itself is a probably 20-minute, half an hour conversation as to how we arrived at them, because it's no good just having them. You need to understand a little bit of the purpose. But thank you for picking up on that. But just keep connected to us and we will share those things over time with you.
Okay, great. Thank you. We're thinking of holding a team coffee morning on a Friday where people can choose to come together or not. Is there anything as a manager they need to be mindful of with initiating this idea?
Anything that they need to be mindful of? What was the last bit of the question?
With initiating this idea of a team coffee morning.
I really love the idea that you're doing a coffee morning. I think that's fantastic. I like the idea that everybody has been invited, but I also like the idea that it's not mandatory to attend. And if people decide not to attend, then I think that's one of those private conversations that you can have with people to say, was there any particular reason for that? Or is there anything else that we could do that you would find more appealing? Because I know there's some people in my team that actually they wouldn't go for that, but I know they wouldn't go for it, so it doesn't trouble me. I think when somebody doesn't accept an offer like that and you don't know why, that's when you have your concerns. So I think that's a great idea. I think doing it on Zoom, if everybody's got access to it, adds an element of fun. If you're going to keep that going as a theme, I know that one group of people that started doing this then actually started to do through the keyhole. So one member of the team would take people around their house and create a video of it, and that would kick off the coffee morning. I think what's nice, if you're going to have a regular feature, is that if you have some kind of theme which gets the conversation going. I don't know about you, but at the moment I'm consuming quite a lot of books. I'm watching quite a lot of stuff on TV, and I've watched some fascinating things and I've read some fascinating things. You know, maybe there's something that you want to build in, but I love the idea. I think it's great, and I think it shouldn't be mandatory unless people want it. And is that the right time for everybody? Because it might just be that it's afternoon tea might be more appropriate for some people. But great. I've got about a minute left on the clock, Emmanuel.
Gosh, there are more questions. How about staff who want to change their work or day pattern? How would you suggest this is possible?
So if what you mean by this question is as a result of shifting to remote working, at the moment, people have gone, I really like this. I'd actually like to consider doing this in the future. Personally, and you know that I'm going to say this, I think that's fantastic. I think that's fantastic for about 30 different reasons, from the environment to the finances of the business and the individual. I mean, there are just so many good reasons. But, you know, we're in a bit of a honeymoon period with it all at the moment. You know, what that person might be signing up to is life at working at home. And, you know, 5 weeks is very different from 10 or 15 years working from home. Okay. So I would say absolutely go with their enthusiasm for it. Go with the energy that's there, assuming, of course, that, you know, you're in agreement with it, which I'm sure as a enlightened leader and manager you would be. But I would say, to begin with, do 2 days working from home, 3 days at the office. Do that for a period of time, see how it goes, then flip it, 3 days working from home, rather than go all in. Because I think, you know what, sometimes it's just too big a shift, and I think everyone needs to learn as they go. So I would be open to it without a doubt, but I'd actually just go cautiously, because it's hard to know what the implications of this are going to be for everyone, and it's got to work for everyone for it to work. Right, that's me done. Emmanuel.
You had a nice comment from an HR manager, wanted to say how good this webinar was, and she's going to share with her manager who didn't attend, and she thought she knew all there was about remote management.
Well, thank you very much, because I tell you what, it's great to do these, but it's also great to get a little bit of praise and a bit of feedback like that. So thank you out there for saying that. That has made my day. That has. I've got some really positive feedback. I'm sure there's some other people out there that have picked up some good tips. If you want to say you really enjoyed it, I'd really appreciate a few words to express that, because that's what keeps me going, folks, really. So thank you very much. This is, you know, one in the series. So, you know, if you come via SEMLEP or you want to come independently, the webinars are free. You found it through SEMLEP. They've done their bit in connecting us. If you want to carry on the journey with us, then, you know, please feel free to do so. So I'm going to say farewell. Thank you very much for your time today, and I wish you all the very best. Take care.
Thank you very much, Neil. And maybe we can answer the last few questions and maybe send them to participants, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, if you want me to answer them in an email format, then I will do that.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you to everybody.
Thank you.
And we hope to see you on a forthcoming webinar. Please watch out for SEMLEP Growth Hub. And thank you very much for your time. Goodbye.